Some crimes are so senseless, so cruel, they leave an entire town haunted. April 1974. Ogden, Utah, a quiet working-class town nestled between the Wasatch Mountains and the Great Salt Lake. The kind of place where families left their doors unlocked and everyone knew your name at the local diner. But that spring, the town of Ogden changed forever, because inside a small electronics shop on Washington Boulevard, something unthinkable happened. The hi-fi shop was a modest storefront, the kind of place that sold stereo systems, cassette decks, and big wooden speakers. On the evening of April 22nd, it was just about closing time. Inside were two young employees, 20-year-old Stanley Walker and 18-year-old Michelle Ansley. Stanley was the assistant manager, dependable, soft-spoken. Michelle, friendly and bright, had only been working there a short time. The two were cleaning up, counting receipts, getting ready to lock the doors. Then, the bell above the entrance jingled. 3 men walked in. The men weren't there to buy anything. Their names were Dale Selby, William Andrews, and Keith Roberts, all enlisted men from Hill Air Force Base. And they had a plan. They were going to rob the store. But this wouldn't be a simple smash and grab. What they brought with them, and what they intended to do, was far more sinister. They pulled guns. Stanley and Michelle were forced into the basement at gunpoint. Their hands were tied behind their backs with electrical cords. They were scared, but they had no idea just how bad things were about to get. As the robbery was in progress, 16-year-old Byron Naisbitt walked into the store. He was just running an errand for his mother, dropping off a payment. He was dragged into the basement. Then Carol Naisbitt, Byron's mother, came looking for him. Then Orrin Walker, Stanley's father, came looking for his son. One by one, they were taken hostage. 6 people, bound, terrified, trapped in the basement of a store they thought was safe. What happened next is one of the most disturbing acts of cruelty in American crime history. Selby and Andrews had read somewhere, in a fiction novel no less, that drain cleaner could be used to silently kill someone. So they poured it into paper cups and forced the victims to drink. But drain cleaner doesn't kill quietly. The sodium hydroxide in the chemical began burning their lips, their throats, their internal organs. Michelle and Stanley screamed. Byron convulsed. Carol begged for it to stop. The killers laughed. They made jokes. The pain wasn't enough, so they began shooting. Stanley was shot in the head. Michelle was shot, then sexually assaulted. Carol Naisbitt, Byron's mother, was killed. Byron was shot as well, but somehow he survived. And Orrin Walker, Stanley's father, he was forced to drink the same liquid. But unlike the others, he didn't swallow it. He held it in his mouth, let it pool in his throat, and he played dead. Selby, apparently frustrated that he was still breathing, wrapped a wire around Orrin's neck, attached it to a ballpoint pen, and twisted. The pen snapped. And then they left, leaving the bodies and the blood behind. A call was made. Police arrived to find one of the most horrifying crime scenes in the city's history. The basement smelled like acid and death. Blood pooled beneath the bodies. Some were cold, some were barely breathing. Byron Naisbitt, against all odds, was alive. Orrin Walker, throat burned and voice damaged, was also alive. Byron later gave a detailed statement, identifying Selby and Andrews. The arrest came quickly. All 3 men were caught within days. Keith Roberts had stayed in the getaway car. Selby and Andrews were found with store receipts, stolen electronics, and the drain cleaner bottle. The trial was swift. Dale Selby and William Andrews were both convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. Keith Roberts was convicted as an accomplice and served prison time. In later appeals, Selby showed no remorse. He even said he found the murders amusing. Selby was executed by lethal injection in 1987. Andrews followed in 1992, but for the victims and their families, the pain never really ended. Orrin never spoke of that night again. Byron, who had been just 16 years old, suffered severe brain damage. His life was never the same. He passed away years later from complications related to the injuries. The hi-fi shop never reopened. It stood empty for a while, and then it disappeared. just like the lives that were taken there. There are crimes that shock, and then there are crimes like the hi-fi murders, where cruelty wasn't the byproduct, it was the goal. The killers didn't just want money, they wanted people to suffer, and they succeeded. Even now, decades later, in Ogden, Utah, that memory still lingers. The bell above the door, the screams from below, the silence that followed. A brutal reminder of the darkness that humans, sometimes, are capable of. In the late fall of 1988, Japan was enjoying a period of calm prosperity. But in a quiet suburb of Tokyo, something monstrous was happening. Something so sadistic and brutal, it would become one of the darkest crimes in Japanese history. Her name was Junko Furuta, and what happened to her is almost too horrific to believe. Junko was 17 years old, a third-year high school student at Yashio Minami High. Bright, focused, kind. She didn't smoke, didn't drink. She had dreams of a career. She worked part-time after school. She was, in every way, a model student. On November 25, 1988, Junko finished her shift at a convenience store and began walking home. She never made it. 4 boys, Hiroshi Miyano, Joe Ogura, Shinji Minato, and Yasushi Watanabe, saw Junko walking alone. Hiroshi, the ringleader, was 18, connected to the Yakuza, known for his violence. The plan was simple. Joe Ogura pretended to be a stranger and attacked her. Then Hiroshi stepped in, acting like a hero, and offered to walk her home. But instead, he led her to an abandoned warehouse. There, they threatened her, told her they knew where her family lived. Then they raped her and dragged her to Minato's house, where the torture truly began. For the next 44 days, Junko was held captive, inside a house where Minato's parents lived, and they knew, but they did nothing. Junko was kept in a room upstairs, naked, starving. The boys beat her daily, punching her, burning her skin with cigarettes. They dropped barbells on her stomach, poured hot wax over her eyelids, inserted foreign objects inside her. She was raped, not just by them, but by their friends. Over 400 times, they urinated on her, forced her to drink urine and eat cockroaches. They shattered her bones with iron bars. One day she tried to crawl downstairs and to escape. They dragged her back up and punished her by setting her legs on fire. Eventually she couldn't walk, couldn't speak, could barely breathe. On January 4th, 1989, after losing a game of mahjong, the boys took out their frustration on her. They beat her with dumbbells. Then they poured lighter fluid over her body and set her on fire. She survived for hours in agony, and then she died. They stuffed her corpse into a 55-gallon drum, filled it with concrete, and dumped it in an abandoned lot in Koto City. It was over, or so they thought. A few weeks later, Miyano and Ogura were arrested for an unrelated assault. During questioning, they slipped up, bragged about having done something big. Police connected the dots. On March 29th, they found the drum. Inside was Junko Furuta's body. Her face was unrecognizable. Her injuries so extensive, it took days to identify her. The nation was horrified. The trial exposed not just the boys' crimes, but the utter failure of everyone around them. Minato's parents, the neighbors who heard screams. No one stepped in. The boys, all under 20, were charged as juveniles and received shockingly light sentences. The ringleader, Miyano, was given 20 years. Some of the others served less than 8. Joe Ogura was later rearrested for beating a man to death. None of them showed true remorse. Not once. Junko Furuta was 17 years old. She endured 44 days of pain most people can't even imagine, and fought to stay alive. Her story shocked Japan and the world. But the injustice of her killers walking free after such cruelty remains a scar. Today, the case is known as the concrete-encased high school girl murder. But behind that title was a real person, a girl who went to school, smiled with friends, and dreamed of a future. A girl who deserved more than this. A girl whose story must never be forgotten, and whose justice still feels unanswered. They called him a pig farmer, but what Robert Pickton did on his farm wasn't farming, it was slaughter. And for years, no one seemed to notice. Or worse, they just didn't care. Between 1997 and 2002, in Port Coquitlam, British Columbia, women began to vanish from Vancouver's downtown east side, a neighborhood where poverty, addiction, and sex work collided under the shadow of indifference. These were women with stories, with families, and they were being hunted. Robert William Pickton ran a pig farm just outside Vancouver. The property was cluttered, sprawling, rusted trailers, decaying barns, piles of scrap metal. It smelled of rot and old blood. Pickton was quiet. Odd. People in town called him Bert. He and his brother Dave threw wild parties. They invited sex workers, drug users, bikers. The police were called many times, but nothing ever stuck. No one imagined what was really going on. The women Pickton targeted were often indigenous, poor, addicted, working the streets to survive. They went missing one by one. Their families reported them, pleaded with police, but time and again they were told, she probably just moved on. Maybe she overdosed. The women became statistics, forgotten, but they didn't just vanish. They were being taken to the farm. At the farm, Pickton would offer women a ride, or drugs, or money. Once there, they couldn't escape. He raped them, then murdered them, with knives, with tools, with a .22 revolver. Afterward, he butchered their bodies. Some he fed to his pigs, others he ground up into mince, and allegedly mixed into meat he sold to local markets. The rest dumped in barrels, scattered across the property, bones, teeth, blood-stained mattresses, nothing was left whole. In February 2002, police raided the Pickton farm on a weapons charge. What they found was a nightmare. Women's belongings, bloody clothes, freezers containing human remains, a skull, a jawbone, DNA from 33 different women, and handwritten notes describing how he murdered his victims. Pickton was arrested and charged with 26 counts of murder. In custody, he bragged to an undercover officer that he had killed 49 women and that his only regret was not making it an even 50. The trial began in 2007. The courtroom overflowed with grief. Family members held photos of their daughters, their sisters, their mothers, and Pickton sat expressionless, cold, empty. He was convicted of 6 counts of second-degree murder, the strongest cases, and sentenced to life in prison with no parole for 25 years. The remaining charges were stayed, legally dropped. Families were devastated. Many never got to see their loved one's killer held accountable. The Pickton case revealed a deep rot in the system. Police had received tips about Pickton years earlier, including one in 1998, when a woman escaped his farm covered in blood. But nothing was done. Why? Because the women he killed weren't seen as important. They were sex workers, addicts, indigenous. Society failed them. Their lives weren't protected. Their deaths weren't investigated. They were disposable until Pickton made it impossible to ignore. The Pickton farm was demolished, the land leveled, the soil dug up. But even now, traces remain in the earth, in the families, in the headlines. Pickton is still alive, sitting in a maximum security prison. He's never shown remorse, never apologized, and yet some of the victims' remains were never recovered. Some families are still waiting for answers that may never come. The pig farm killer didn't just murder dozens of women, he exposed how easily society can ignore the most vulnerable and how silence can be deadly. There's a specific kind of heartbreak that comes with an unsolved murder. But when 4 teenagers are taken, suddenly, violently, and the truth never follows, it doesn't just haunt the families, it haunts the entire town. And that's exactly what happened in Speedway, Indiana, in the fall of 1978. A crime so senseless, so utterly tragic, it still sits like a splinter in the town's history. They call it the Speedway slaughter, and no one ever paid the price. It was Friday, November 17, 1978, just before midnight. At the Burger Chef on Crawfordsville Road, 4 young employees were finishing up their shift. Jane Freet, 20, was the assistant manager, organized, responsible. Ruth Shelton, 18, was friendly and bookish, saving up for college. Mark Flemons and Daniel Davis, both 16, were the youngest. Still in high school, new to the job, dreaming of fast cars and freedom, they cleaned the counters, counted the register, stacked chairs and locked the doors. But they never made it home. Just after midnight, another employee swung by to pick up a forgotten jacket. The back door of the restaurant was hanging open. Inside, the place looked abandoned. The cash register was empty, $581 missing. But more disturbing than the missing money, the employees were gone. No sign of a struggle, no note, just emptiness. Police assumed it was a runaway prank, that the teens had taken the money and skipped town. So they let the staff clean the restaurant, clean the crime scene. Vital evidence was destroyed. Fingerprints, blood traces, footprints. By the time authorities realized something was seriously wrong, it was already too late. The following day, Jane's Chevrolet Vega was found 2 miles away, parked oddly, unlocked. But there was no sign of Jane, no sign of the others. That's when panic set in. Parents started calling every hour. Flyers went up. Search parties formed. Then on Sunday, 2 days after they disappeared, a grim discovery. In a wooded area near Johnson County, about 20 miles from Speedway, 4 bodies, left in a ditch, 4 kids, executed like garbage. Jane Freet had been stabbed so violently, the blades snapped off in her chest. Ruth Shelton and Daniel Davis were shot execution style, behind the ear. Mark Flemons was found beaten to death, likely trying to run. There were no signs of sexual assault, no personal items missing, just the stolen cash. The question on everyone's mind, why? Why drive them 20 miles into the woods? Why kill them at all? And who could have done this? From the beginning, the investigation was botched. Key evidence was destroyed. The scene was compromised. Witnesses were ignored. Theories piled up. A robbery gone wrong, gang initiation, drug deal misfire, even whispers of a serial killer. A man eventually confessed, giving detailed descriptions, but later recanted. No charges were filed. The confession was dismissed, and over the years, the case grew cold. Jane was the eldest. She wanted to be a teacher. Ruth played clarinet. She was applying to college. Daniel loved motorcycles. Mark was quiet but sweet, his first real job. Their families never recovered. For years, birthdays passed with no candles, holidays with empty seats. All they had were questions, and no one to answer them. More than 40 years later, the Speedway murders remain unsolved. In 2020, a documentary brought the case back into public view, reigniting interest, offering new tips, but nothing solid. No arrests, no trial, no justice. 4 kids went to work on a Friday night and never came home. What happened in that burger chef is more than a cold case. It's a wound, still open, and a chilling reminder that even in small towns, evil doesn't need a reason,